Welcome. You're listening to Retirement with Meaning. I'm Carmen Aceta, I'm your host, and this is episode number 13, a potpourri of helps and opportunities for your second half of life. In today's episode, I'm mainly going to be expanding on some recent posts on my Facebook page. This will be a good opportunity to practice awareness of how you're being impacted and of what calls to you. It would be a good opportunity to practice being present. We're so used to multitasking and a lot of doing at one time, which can be good in some circumstances, but decidedly detrimental in many of the circumstances we find ourselves working in for the second half of life work. And it will be an opportunity to see if there's something you want to begin to focus on, some specific growth area for your life. And something new is I want to introduce the idea or the question of why are you not doing what you say you want to do, especially as regards your second half of life or your retirement years. We're not going to do much with it today, but just to get the subject moving more into the foreground. To get started then with the first of the segments I'm going to highlight, we'll begin with what I call keeping on, roughly equivalent to persevering, staying engaged. And this becomes even more and more important as we age, when there are many temptations appear to disengage, to start to coast. So I'm going to read you a list of famous people and their accomplishments at an advanced age. They definitely stayed engaged, particularly with the passion of their life. And while we might not be famous, we can still strive to imitate the famous people in doing what has heart and life and meaning for us for as long as possible. So here they are. At 100, Grandma Moses was still painting. At 98, Titian painted the Battle of Lepanto. At 93, George Bernard Shaw wrote Far-Fetched Fables. At 91, Eamon de Valera served as President of Ireland. At 90, Pablo Picasso still drew and engraved. At 89, Arthur Rubinstein gave one of his greatest recitals in New York's Carnegie Hall. At 82, Winston Churchill wrote the 4-volume work, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples. At 82, Leo Tolstoy completed I Cannot Be Silent. Also at 82, Goethe finished Faust. At 81, Benjamin Franklin engineered the diplomacy that led to the adoption of the Constitution of the United States. I would imagine that, as well known as they were, they still probably had to deal with doubters, or people that were not so sure it was a good idea to have them doing these things, or giving a performance, or having a book published, whatever it might have been. And that leads me to my next segment, which is messages from the first half of life that could use re-examining in your second half. There are messages that can easily slow us down or stop us altogether that are fairly routinely brought from the first half of life. They're pretty common. So it's often necessary to examine those messages or tapes that are still playing from the first half. Otherwise, they could hold you back from the growth that you're called to. That's a natural part of the second half of life. So here is where the ability and the willingness to look inward and learn what's there becomes so important. And you can now decide for yourself as an adult whether these messages are still right for you, or if they were ever right for you. We call them introjections for one word or one definition, in that they're messages that we swallowed whole, The adults in our life, of course, were much bigger than we were and knew more, and we assumed that they knew what they were talking about. And so what they said, we just took in as the value or what was to be done. Some of the work of adulthood, and definitely by the second half of life, would be to take those out. Before we swallowed them whole, and now we might need to chew them a bit, and this time keep what we want and perhaps spit out the rest. But we now make a conscious decision about them, rather than having just inhaled them with the air we breathe, more or less. Here then is my list of momentum stoppers, or certainly slowers, from childhood. Sometimes you might have heard these exact words. Sometimes you simply intuited the message without anybody having to spell it out for you. 1. My worth comes from what I do or achieve. 2. Doing is more important than being. 3. If I think of my own welfare and take care of myself, I'm selfish. 4. If I say no to what others want from me, I'm selfish. 5. Love is conditional on whether I please the other person. 6. If I acknowledge what was hurtful to me in my growing up, I'm being disloyal to my family and unappreciative of my parents. 7. If I go against my family's norms to pursue my own path, I'm being disloyal. 8. If I want what others believe is insignificant or frivolous, I'm being foolish. 9. Grow up. Get over it. Suck it up. Stop complaining. It's not that bad. Others have it worse. This doesn't mean that we think only about ourselves in all situations and that we are, in fact, selfish. It can mean we've set healthy boundaries and we have regard for ourselves as well as others. Sometimes by the second half, we're just ready to let go of this old baggage that no longer has life in it for us. Sometimes you might want to consider professional help to deal with the really entrenched ones. But either way, the second half of life is a great opportunity for healing and moving on. I imagine it would be very hard for just about anybody to have gotten through life without having encountered at least some of those. And I hope if you have, you've either successfully dealt with them by now or that you know they need dealt with and will do so that you can move on and continue to grow. Next, what are you doing with your experience and wisdom? Remember, we've begun viewing the second half through the lenses of knowing, growing, and sowing. And that's a natural progression and a very good fit for the second half of life and the retirement or elder years. So here's an assignment if you choose to accept it. It's to help you to know and own what you already have and to support the knowing, growing, and sowing you still want to do. You can work on it as an ongoing endeavor, and you can add to it as you discover more. So it can be a work in progress for the rest of your life. One thing you might try is to list your most satisfying accomplishments. They might be internal as well as external, and even ones that only you know about. Second, to list what qualities are you pleased to have developed. And third, what would you say are your best talents, abilities, and skills? And then consider what use you might like to make of your answers to those first three questions. That use would be sowing, S-O-W-I-N-G, in service to your immediate family, and all the way up to the family of mankind if you go that far. Well, in my earliest podcast, I said that my general answer to dealing with the problems and issues of moving into and through the second half of life is to grow you. And our retirement and elder years are a very fertile season for remaking meaning and purpose and for spiritual growth, and particularly then for giving back, particularly to those closest to us and then to others. And once again, depending on your range and your goals, even to the world at large. So let's take a moment before going on to the next segment to sort of tune in to what's happening with you right now. Has anything that you've heard so far, either from Keep On Keeping On or messages from the first half of life that might need re-examined? And what are you doing with your experience and wisdom? Is there anything, if you pause and get quiet for a moment, that's there for you even as I speak? Perhaps it was one or more of those messages from the past. Perhaps you experienced some movement away from some of the things that I was saying. You might try sometime, or even in the remainder of this podcast, keeping a writing instrument beside you and not so much taking messages on what I'm saying, but making notes about how you're being impacted or what's being evoked in you, so that you will have that to come back to and ponder and get quiet with and go inside with and learn from. And out of that might come a direction or something that calls to you. Next segment, being happy with being. If you've listened to my podcast before now, or read any of my Facebook posts, you've heard more than once about the importance of the shift in emphasis from doing to being in the second half of life. This is a time for coming to know and accept your true self and to develop your spirituality, including your relationship with God or spirit or whatever way you think of the transcendent or mysterious. At its peak, at its best somehow, it's a time to become the best version of yourself you can be, although you're free to modulate this to the level of intensity that you want. You can set your own goals. You can apportion your energy according to what your energy level is, what you're capable of dealing with. This is one of the reasons that it's so important to get quiet, to go inward during this time, the second half of life. It's time for presence, awareness. If you need a practical venue for engaging with this process, I'd suggest beginning or becoming more consistent with some form of meditative practice, such as mindfulness meditation, which seems popular right now. Other types of meditation, or even yoga or Tai Chi, or any practice that slows you down and helps get you present and in your body would serve well. Find what feels right for you. There are a lot of practitioners and facilities out there to draw on if you need help with these or any other related discipline. There are many health benefits from meditative practices. A big one is that they exert the opposite effects on the body and mind that stress causes. So some type of related practice is very important in facilitating the rich growth opportunities in the second half of life. And again, this is a far more hopeful message than we often hear about our retirement years and the aging process. But it's true, and it's waiting for you to come aboard the growth train. I hear that it's time for the infomercial. So I want to suggest, is very similar to what I suggested the last time, to begin experimenting with some aspect of the second half of life mode or principles, or begin to implement movement into some second half of life growth that you want to pursue. And you can change your mind as many times as you need to as other things come more to the foreground. Some possibilities to try that would help advance that work, or to try taking some quiet, silent time to focus inward. Pay attention to what draws you or calls you or comes to you somehow, whether it's in some formal quiet time or not. See if anything's emerging from the background and beginning to stand out to you and draw you in some way. And make this work for you. Scale your involvement, your energy expenditure down to what's doable for you in your particular circumstances and has heart and has life for you. And remember the importance of keeping on, keeping on. And with podcast number 14, I'll share with you a personal history of a woman I've known for some time and who is an excellent example of keeping on under some pretty difficult circumstances. Continuing in the health area, this segment is Get Moving. All forms of exercise are good, and by all means, if you have an exercise program that works for you, stick with it. Today, though, I'm going to talk about aerobic exercise. For one, it's the type of exercise I'm most familiar with and the one I like most. And I'll provide a link if you want a little more detail. But first, I'll share some of my own experience with you. As I record this podcast, I'm 85 years old, and my personal experience has shown me this. At this stage of my life, the people I see who are doing the best health-wise, mentally and physically, I would say, are ones who've remained active and appear to have a reasonably healthy diet. There might be some exceptions, but I won't want to play with those odds. So having remained active all my life has allowed me to still enjoy activities I enjoyed all my life. And that certainly was one of the big reasons that kept me staying active. I wanted to be able to do the things I enjoyed and were productive or good for others for as long as I could. I personally, especially in the early years, leaned towards sports, but you don't have to do sports in order to derive aerobic benefits. I played in an over 55 softball league. I ran and finished my last marathon at 62. It was my last because I felt drawn to return to tennis. I played in competitive doubles in tennis in a United States Tennis Association league until somewhere past my mid-70s. And I not only enjoyed the physical benefits, but they carried over into my life outside of exercise and helped my mental and emotional well-being as well. Pretty early in my second career, I was the recreation therapist at an adolescent inpatient unit for treating drug and alcohol addiction. I used to run on my lunch hour, and one day I was returning to the facility and met one of the nurses leaving the building as I was approaching the building, and she said, "You were running, weren't you?" Her husband happened to be one of the top-ranked runners in the area. And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I could tell because of the peaceful look on your face." And it was true. Adolescent inpatient could get pretty hectic. And yet, when I returned from my run, I felt calm. I felt peaceful, and it showed. I'm sure I'm not the only person who believes that our bodies are meant to be in motion. And aerobic exercises definitely get you into motion. So, in the meantime, if you're listening to this sitting down, consider getting up and walking around a little. In this next segment, I'm still talking about aerobics, but I'm going to call it Have a Heart. I just shared some of my personal experience with aerobic exercise, and now I want to give you some information that the Cleveland Clinic offers. Here are some general positives that help make aerobic exercise one of the best things you can do for yourself, really, at any age. So the Cleveland Clinic says this: aerobic exercise provides cardiovascular conditioning. The term aerobic actually means with oxygen, which means that breathing controls the amount of oxygen that can make it to the muscles to help them burn fuel and move. So some key benefits of aerobic conditioning are: 1, it improves cardiovascular conditioning. 2, decreases the risk of heart disease. 3, lowers blood pressure. 4, increases HDL or good cholesterol. 5. Helps to better manage blood sugar. 6. Assists in weight management and or weight loss. 7. Improves lung function. 8. Decreases resting heart rate. Do you know anyone who could use some of those benefits of aerobic exercise? Surely those are common problems in our society now. Could you benefit? The other side of the coin is that aerobic exercise can often hold off the development of some of those issues, and when you have them, can help to reverse them. Some lower impact aerobic exercises include swimming, cycling, using an elliptical trainer, walking, rowing, and using an upper body ergometer, which is a piece of equipment that provides a cardiovascular workout that targets the upper body only. Some higher impact aerobic exercises include running, jumping rope, and performing high impact routines or step aerobics. The American Heart Association recommends that everyone reach a minimum of 30 minutes of some form of cardiovascular exercise 5 to 7 days per week. And besides the concrete health benefits mentioned, that feeling of well-being and increased energy was a big plus for me. I could go for a run after work and come home feeling more energized than when I started my run. I even felt like a more friendly person when I encountered people on the trail. And the Cleveland Clinic recommends that you talk with your physician before you start an exercise program and ask what, if any, limitations you might have. If you'd like to read the entire article from the Cleveland Clinic, the link is rather long, but you could Google Cleveland Clinic aerobic exercise, and the article will be one of the first ones to appear. Also, here's a bonus link for the ladies. My daughter Julie runs an exercise program for women transitioning into menopause and already in menopause. And in fact, my 80-year-old wife Carol participates in it. Here's the link, which is a little shorter and hopefully you won't lose anything in translation. If it does, you could probably just Google Happy Moms Lift and get it. It's https://www.instagram.com/happy-moms-lift/. And that was moms plural, in case that wasn't clear. My final segment is a quote from Abraham Lincoln, who anticipated the second half of life with that quote, although he probably didn't know that. And he said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And I think most of us know the anxiety, the haunting even questions that retirement or even anticipated retirement can bring. And we also know about and have probably experienced the gloomy, the discouraging predictions that come from others, including our youth-oriented culture, about the aging process. But if you continue to learn what you have to do differently in the second half of life and implement its principles, you will be, in fact, creating your future rather than living out someone else's self-fulfilling prophecy. And you can also leave a powerful legacy of love and example. So as I move toward closing today, rather than reading a quote or an article or a short poem, as I often end the podcast with, I'm going to read you some comments from some group members of mine who participated in my original second half of life live groups. I had asked them to comment on what drew them to the group in the first place and what the experience was like and what it produced for them. So you will be hearing from people who set out to create their future differently from what had been predicted and more the way they wanted it to be. Here's the first comment. I was drawn to participate in the second half of life group because it provides an opportunity to engage with others who strive to make this important part of life even more exciting and meaningful. It is one of the few places where I have found others who truly want to explore and live to the fullest. I feel I have come to appreciate my life more. I also feel a deeper spiritual connection. And that's from a woman aged 68. The next one. What attracted me to participating in the second half of life group was the idea of taking inventory of myself at this important stage of life. I wanted to see which parts of myself I wanted to bring along into the next few decades and which ones I desired to shed. I was curious to see if I could interact with the activities of life differently. I have been working at including more of myself in my days instead of filling them up with the needs of others. I wanted to pause a little so I could direct myself into this next stage instead of it directing me. After being in one series of the group, this is happening slowly and steadily. I am finding myself thinking about my place in my day rather than charging around responding to incoming demands. By sharing with others who are also taking stock of themselves and their lives, I have seen myself in a new light. This has allowed me to be more present and more at peace. I am excited to uncover more of me as I continue down this journey with the friends I have made in the group. From a woman aged 60. The next one. I was 50 years old with 3 kids out of college and running a successful business. Running was the operative word here. I felt like I was trapped on an endless treadmill, and I was tired and burned out. Then my slightly older sister had a debilitating stroke. I found myself asking, would I keep doing this if I knew I only had a few good years left? The answer was no. While struggling with what to do, I stumbled upon this group. What a rare, wonderful, and timely gift. These bi-weekly meetings are the highlight of my month now. It's a woman aged 50. I'm trying to stay active in the game of life. I know that the later years are to be different, but I do not want them to be less. The group support is great and motivates me to come back. I have learned something from everyone in the group. It is interesting to see that everyone is trying to be or do better at something. This program helps us to reflect on and value life and not just let it drift by. I have always had to work hard to listen to others because I get caught up in my own thoughts. This program has helped me to work on this issue. The program has helped me to organize the direction for the current and next phase of life. I have also learned that I must let go of some old laundry. And this was a man aged 60. What would you write if you were asked to say why you are pursuing information about the second half of life or about your retirement years? What would you want to get out of it? What would be your goals? I know this podcast is not a live group, and I would certainly support that to any extent that you can. You have someone to partner with to help and support each other along the way. Or if you get into activities with people who might not be doing second half of life work, but are interested in growing or interested in working on themselves, that you find kindred spirits for mutual support and to help you stay engaged. I mentioned earlier in the podcast a somewhat new segment I was going to introduce at least the concept of, so I'll do that now and then move toward closing. It's time to start being aware of and interested in why you are not doing what you said you want to do regarding the second half of life work. I don't mean this as some judgment upon you, but rather so you can be informed as to what's happening and what might be holding you back, or what might give you a boost. So in the next podcast, if not more than one, I'm going to circle back to resistance, which I had talked a fair amount about in the earlier podcast, and zeroing in on some things that might be good to know as you attempt to move ahead and grow. So thanks for listening, and I hope you will join me for episode 14.